Hi friends, welcome back to Azure Content YouTube channel. This is part 19 in SQL Real-Time Scenarios playlist. In this video, we are going to learn how to auto-create pivot table based on the column names using dynamic SQL. So our requirement is, as we have seen in part 17 and 18 of this playlist, we have tried to pivot the data from sales table and converted it into this format, where we took the distinct values from month name and we used it as the column names in the new table. So you can see the distinct values from sales table is Jan, Feb and March in this scenario, and we are trying to pivot it and we got the aggregate sales amount in the values for these columns. Okay, so this is how our pivot table looks like. So we had achieved this scenario in part 17 by hard coding the column list, and in part 18 we had made it a dynamic SQL query where the query was able to fetch the distinct values from the month name and was able to generate the column list dynamically. So when we inserted some additional data into sales table with the column name April, May and December, the dynamic SQL query that we created was automatically able to fetch out the column list, and it was giving this data as the output in the pivoted table. So now in this video, what we want to do is we want to store this data in a physical table in SQL Server. So we want to create the dynamic SQL query to auto create the table and store this pivoted table data into that physical table. So on the fly, we should be able to create the table and we should be able to insert this record dynamically. So suppose now if we insert some more additional rows into the sales table, it should be dynamically able to generate the data in the pivoted table as well. And for that as well, we should be able to create the table automatically. Okay, so let's go to SSMS and start writing the SQL queries to achieve this requirement. So this is our sales table. Right now we have 27 rows in this table where it has the data for employee ID 1, 2 and 3 for several months starting from Jan, then it has for Feb, March, April, May and then December. Okay, so we already had created the dynamic SQL query in order to pivot the table and generate the month's name dynamically. Okay, so we will write the same query from scratch, but this time we will try to store the data into a physical table in the SQL. Okay, so for that, let's start writing the same dynamic query, but in middle we will be also trying to create the table on the fly and insert the data into that table dynamically. So I'm not going to explain each and every details because we have already gone through that in the previous videos. So I'll start writing the query. Okay, so first of all we will declare the SQL variable and we will have it as VARCHAR max as we have seen in previous video, where we will store the pivot query. So the pivot query that we have already seen, select star from and then select then these column names, employee ID, month name and sales amount. Okay, from sales table. Why we are explicitly writing these column names instead of just using select star is if you want to remove some unwanted columns, we can use this kind of query. But right now we don't have ID column. I have removed it from the sales table. So we can directly also use select star from table name and then we can use pivot. But for now it doesn't matter, let it be. And then we will use pivot operator on top of this to get the sum of sales amount, right? So sum of sales amount for month name column in. Okay, so here is where we have to put the output column names. So in our scenario we have to use the dynamic query to generate the column names, right? So here in between the concatenation we have to use the column lists that we have already created in the previous video. So I'm just doing the same thing. We will declare the column list variable and I'll give it as varchar max, and as we know we have to use select to generate the column list, okay, using string aggregate function. So I'm going to use string aggregate on top of month name and we are going to split it by using comma separator and we are going to use the subquery select distinct month name from sales table, right? And let me name this as subquery. Let me just give SQ. Okay, and this column list variable we are going to use here so that it will dynamically generate this column list for the pivot table. And now we are going to execute this sp underscore execute SQL. Okay, and we also have to give an alias here, so I'll give as pivot table. So let me run this now to generate the pivot table. So if I execute it, it says incorrect syntax near pivot. Okay, so let me try to run only this command and see what is missing here. Okay, so we have not given an alias to this subquery, so let me give it as subquery, and now let me try to run this. Okay, so you can see it has successfully pivoted the data by dynamically taking the column names from sales table. So this is what we have done in the previous video, and we had also sorted the data by chronological order. Here you can see it is still sorted by alphabetical order. That is, April is coming first, and then December, February, Jan, which means this is sorted alphabetically instead of sorting by the calendar months. Okay, so we had also used something called within group here in order to sort it by using the date part, right? So let me do that. So within group, we will be using order by function so that we can take the month number out of the month name, and then we will sort using the month number. So we will use date part function where we will fetch out the month number out of the month name column. Okay, and in order to use the date part function, we have to pass on the full date. Okay, so to do that, we will be using cast in order to convert it into date time, and we also have to concatenate it with a date value, right? So I'll be giving 01/2025, and let me cast it as date time. Okay, okay, so we are done, and let me enter here, and let me close one more bracket, and I think we are good with this. Let me try to run this, and now you can see this column list has been sorted in chronological order. So this is what our query was. I have not actually went deep inside explaining this query because we have already done till this point in our previous video. So please go through part 18 of this playlist in order to understand this query in a better way. And now what we need to do is we need to store this whole table in a physical table in SQL Server, so that whenever I want to track this data, I can just select star from that table and I can see this pivoted data. Okay, so I want to create that table dynamically so that even if we have any change made in the sales table, and if we run this query which will be inserting the data dynamically into the pivoted table, then I should be also seeing the new data coming in the pivoted table. So I have to write that in the dynamic SQL query itself. So in order to do that, what I will do is I will create another variable. So let me do that. So let me say declare, say create table variable. Okay, and I'll give it as varchar max. No, let me give it as NVARCHAR max, because here also we will be storing a SQL query that we will run using this SP. Okay, so let me give the create table script here, create table, and then we will say pivoted SQL data. Okay, and this is the table name that it will create, and then we have to give the table schema here. So for that, what will be the table schema? It will be basically the same column names that we will get out of this query. So employee ID is fixed here, so I'll be giving employee ID column name explicitly, and what is the data type? Integer, right? And then I have to give a comma, and then I have to give all these column names dynamically. So I cannot just go ahead and say Jan int, Feb int. I cannot write like that because I don't want to hard code the column names here. Whatever is present in the sales table, it should automatically get those column names and create the table, pivoted table on the fly according to those column names. Okay, so here what we will do is, let me remove this closure bracket, and then we will fetch the query dynamically. So till now, what is the query? Let me print it here. Create table. So this is the variable. So what is this variable storing? You can see till now our create table script has come up to this point. Create table, then table name, employee ID, int. So if I run till this point by closing the brackets, it is basically a correct query which will give us the table, right? So it is completed successfully, and it actually generated the table called pivoted SQL data. Okay, so you can see it is only having employee ID, right? So this is how create table script will work, but we also need all the column names here, like Jan int, Feb int, because but we want to generate it dynamically. So let me remove this, and here till now we have got only till this point. Okay, so now we want to have the automatically generated column list here. So for that, if I try to use this variable column list here, so suppose if I give concatenation and then if I use column list, and let's say if I close this bracket here, and let's try to print this query now, and let's see if it actually gives the correct query or not. So you can see create table, then table name, and then employee ID int. Till this point we have hard coded it, and then you can see we are getting the correct column list, but it is not giving us the data type which is actually needed to create the table. If I just try to execute this query, it will fail, saying that there is no data type here. Okay, so it must include the data type. So what we are missing here is we need to have int for all these column names. Okay, so what we can do here is, instead of using this @ column list, we have to again fetch out the columns dynamically from the sales table. So basically we have to use this query, but after this we have to concatenate integer as the data type. So let me try to get the string aggregate of month name from the sales table. So let me try to copy this. Okay, so we will use select statement, and we will manipulate this create table variable. What we will do is we will concatenate this create table variable, and I'm going to paste what we have copied from here, and now we will change something here. Okay, so till this point it will take from this query and it will add it here, right? So this is basically the same thing, it will come here. Okay, so this is going to be the same string till this point, and after that it will fetch out the month name. But here we have to make some changes, because after each month name we need to add the data type, that is integer data type. Okay, so here inside this string aggregate function we are fetching out the month name from sales table, and here itself I am going to concatenate. So int will go here, and now let's try to run till this point. So now if you see the result, it has actually concatenated int for all the column list. Okay, and the only thing that is missing here is the closure bracket. So let me try to add that. So before from, let me add the closure bracket here. Okay, so I think we should be good now. So if I execute it, so you can see it has added the closure bracket as well. So we are good now. We have created the create table script that we will use in order to create the pivot table dynamically by taking the column names from sales table. So in order to create the table, instead of just printing it, what we will do is we will execute this query if the table does not exist already. So whenever we run this whole query, it should be taking the column list from sales table dynamically, and it should actually create the same schema for pivoted SQL data, which means we also have to delete or drop the already existing table whenever there is any change in the sales table. So for that, what we are going to do is we will check if the table already exists in SQL or not. If the table does not exist, then just create it. or we can also say if the table already exists, then drop the table and then create it. So for that, there is something called object ID in SQL. So suppose if I select object underscore ID of this table, which is pivoted SQL table. Okay, if I just run till this point, so it is giving, so you can see it is giving some result because we have just created this table, right? So let me drop this table right now. So let me drop this table. Okay, so we have dropped the table, and now if I try to select this, you will get null. So basically, when the table is already present in the SQL, it will have some object ID related to that table. But if the table is not present, then the object ID will come as null. So with this idea, we are just going to say if the object ID of this table is null, okay, then create the table. So we will say this create table script will run. Okay, so let me try to use exec sp underscore execute SQL stored procedure, and then we will use this create table. So what it will do is if the table is not present, then it will create it, but actually we should also drop the table if it is present. So for that, if the object ID is not null, which means if the object is already present, if the table is already present, then we should be dropping this table called pivoted SQL table. Okay, and then we should be creating this table by using this sp underscores exec SQL statement. Okay, so now this query is correct if the object ID is already present, which means if it is not null, then just drop the table and recreate the table with the desired schema coming from the latest record from the sales table. Okay, so this is how it will create the table on the fly. So if I execute it, you can see it would have created the table. Let me select star from the table, and if we see, it has created the table. Now we also have to insert records into this table, right? So what records we have to insert is we have to insert the same record which is coming from this query, which means we have to insert the pivoted table record. So what we have to do is in this SQL query, we are just selecting the data. So now we also need to insert the same record into the pivoted table. Okay, so let me copy the pivoted table name and insert into this table, select star from this pivot query. Okay, so now whatever data will be coming from this pivot query, it will be inserted into the pivot table. Okay, so now if I run the whole script, okay, so you can see 3 rows have been affected, which means 3 rows got inserted into the pivoted table. So if I say select star from this pivoted table, okay, so now you can see the data is also coming for the table, and this is the same data that is coming from the pivot table script. Okay, so if suppose we insert some more records in sales table for some other months, say suppose August and September, then it should be actually inserting those records into the pivoted table as well. Okay, if I run this query, so let's try to insert some records into sales table now. So I already have the insert query ready. So let me paste it here. And till now you can see in the sales table, we don't have the records for August and September. So if I run this, it will insert the records for employee ID 1, 2 and 3 for the month of August and September. So let me execute it. Okay, so we are done here. And in the sales table, now we also have the data for the month of August and September. So if we run this query now, okay, so if we run this query now, we are expecting that in the pivoted table as well, it will add the data for the month of August and September. Basically, it will alter the schema by dropping the table and recreating it, and it will also have the column names called August and September now. So let me execute it. Okay, so 3 rows got inserted into the pivoted table, and if I execute it, you can see we have the data for the month of August and September as well. Okay, and this data is sorted chronologically based on the month's name, okay, in the calendar. So basically we have actually successfully created the table on the fly automatically by taking the column names coming from the sales table, and it is dynamically generating the column names in the pivoted table as well. So in this video we have understood how to create the table dynamically by using the dynamic schema for the table. So that's it for this video, guys. I hope you found this video helpful. Please hit on like button and please subscribe to my channel if you haven't done it yet. Thank you.